pounding on the Facebook, pounding on the doors, and trying to go door to door and get people to understand, hey, this is not politics, this is you. Get rid of the word politics and put my life in that little blank there. And that's the hardest thing, whether I'm teaching it in class or whether I'm teaching it out on the street, is to get people to understand that politics isn't something that you have to run away from, that you have to be afraid of, that you have to avoid. In fact, it's the opposite. Politics is something that you have to embrace because it happens every day, in every situation. Politics is happening all around us. How'd you guys decide who did the dishes last night?
I don't know, I don't ever do the dishes.
I did the dishes.
She doesn't
Set up then. That's politics,
Right,
but I
right.
bet you take the trash out all the time, right?
Yeah, I know what you
You have a job. You have a understanding, and when that job doesn't happen,
Thank you.
what happens? Somebody gets upset, right?
Right.
Somebody says, "Oh, well, why didn't this occur? And why did my plan not work?" Politics is about getting what you want. Politics is about getting what you need. Politics is about applying the resources to your particular wants and your particular needs. And that's why we get such a diversity and such a cultural divergence, because everybody has different wants and different needs. And that's the way it's supposed to work. That's the way it was intended to work. That was the way it was designed to work. The founders got together and they said, look, all this other stuff doesn't really work so well. This monarchy stuff doesn't work so well. This dictatorship stuff doesn't work so well. How can we come up with a system? And by the way, we were the first to do this. How can we come up with a system that is going to allow for the individual and allow for the group? How do we have a system that's going to allow for the citizen and allow for the government? How do we have a system that is going to make enough room for everybody to be able to enjoy equal opportunity? And after a lot of deliberation, and after a failed attempt with the Articles of Confederation, and after a little bit of trial and error, some really smart people using some basic philosophy that came out of the Renaissance and the classical liberal age, because unfortunately, whether you want to admit it or not, we're all classical liberalists. All right? Which means that we believe in personal freedom. Which means that we believe in liberty. How we get to that, we can argue about, and we can have all sorts of different nuances and all different sorts of parties and everything else. But at the root of it, we believe in personal liberty, and we believe in self-interest, in free will. Okay, we believe in promoting that. And through the promotion of free will and self-interest, we will develop groups. We will develop organizations. We will develop the very thing that our founders were most fearful of, factions. Okay, which in today's terms are known as political parties. Okay, so these factions are what both Adams, Washington, Madison all said would bring down the republic. It will be the factions that destroy our republic. And they weren't sure how fast it would occur. And frankly, Jefferson would have been amazed that it took 238 years. Jefferson said, hey, every 30 to 40 years, we need to sow the seeds or sow the fields of liberty with the blood of tyrants and patriots alike, right? Or something close to that. And the reason why was he believed that corruption manifests itself regardless of the people that hold the reins of power. And this was a fear of the founders. They knew that if people acted in self-interest, well, then there could be a very strong possibility for power to corrupt. Power corrupts absolutely, right? But on the other side, we know if we allow institutions to have power, then it corrupts. And it corrupts absolutely. So we developed a system of checks and balances that allowed for these competing interests to coexist. Okay? And without people enacting in their self-interest, none of this framework that was created works properly. Okay, and let me try and illustrate this with an idea. A lot of people like to call politics a game. I call it a game all the time. You know, it's how you play the game, and how well you are at playing the game determines how fast you get the resources you need for your particular groups of people or for your self-interest. When I say self-interest, I'm not talking about just your narrow-minded point of view from your individual. Because you're human beings, you're more than that, right? It's not only that, because that's your core, that's part of it, but it's also what your family needs and wants, right? It's also what your particular social organizations that you decide to hang out with need and want. It's what your larger political parties need and want. It's what your state needs and wants, right? And because everybody's coming from such a diverse and myriad of different places, no problem. they have the ability to create a large playing field. Anybody ever play that game when they were a kid, trampoline? You ever do that? I don't know if they do that in PE anymore. My generation may have been the last one. But you get a canvas, right? Square canvas, round canvas, doesn't really matter. And everybody grabs a piece of the canvas. And they all walk back, right? And if everybody's pulling on the piece of that canvas and they all walk back in their own individual directions, what happens to that piece of canvas? It spreads out, becomes taut. It becomes something that everybody can jump on and have fun with and play with, right? Now what happens if 80% of those people drop their corner of the canvas? Can you jump on democracy anymore? No. Then you have what I believe we have, which is a controlling of only a few special interests that have taken over our country through a lot of different mechanisms. The main one being apathy and people's lack of understanding that politics isn't a game. Politics isn't something that is for other people. Politics isn't something for just people that are trained. But politics is your life. And the people that you represent to control your life. Because that's what it is. It is control. It is laws, it is rules, it is regulations, it is how you will go through society. It is how you will behave in society. And if we've all given up on caring about our own self-interest, who are those politicians going to listen to? Because remember, those politicians are acting according to the way it was designed, in their self-interest. Right? So what is their self-interest? What do they want to do in 2 years, 4 years, 6 years?
It's the same thing.
They want to get reelected, right? And right now, who's reelecting them?
Each other.
We do.
No, we don't,
We
because
don't.
we've given up. We don't care about politics anymore. 80% of us don't even play the game,
Yeah, right.
okay? The other 20% of us that play the game are split between two clubs called R's and D's,
Yeah.
right? And they're not even really playing the game for us. They're playing the game for them, for the R or for the D camp, right?
They're 99% similar.
Right, well, yeah, they're the same side of they're two sides of the same coin, right?
Work together.
Yes, they do.
in
And
tandem.
because they want collusion, and they want more people not caring, not being self-interested, right? Because if I'm self-interested, and you're self-interested, and you're self-interested, and you're self-interested, and you're in front of that legislator, whether he's a state legislator, whether he's a federal legislator, whether he's your mayor, or she's your mayor, it doesn't really matter, right? Then all of a sudden, this person has to make their decision based on all those different points of views. You know, instead of just 2 points of view. Because really, that's what it normally about boils down to in Tallahassee or DC. It's the for or the against on any particular bill. There's no why for or why against. There's no what ramifications for, what ramifications against. It's, I've contributed this much money to your campaign and you're for it. or I've contributed this much money to your campaign and you're against it. Not really what the consequences of the bill is going to be. It's going to be who's playing the game, right? Now, we really can't blame the Republicans and the Democrats for playing the game and acting in their self-interest. They're doing what they're supposed to do. We can't blame the special interests either, because they're doing what they're supposed to do. I'm in the alternative energy sector. I get my ass kicked daily by big oil because they have the money to do what I want to do, which is to be able to get in front of lawmakers and say, hey, make laws that help me out. Make laws that help my industry out, because that's in my self-interest. And that's part of the whole thing. You're not going to get rid of lobbyists. You're not going to get rid of people asking for their political piece of the pie. That's the way it works. Okay, the reason why it's broke is because enough people are not asking for their piece of the pie. Enough people are not acting in their self-interest. Enough people are allowing the R's, the D's, the Monsantos, the special interests, whatever huge conglomerate you want to call the boogeyman or blame your problems on, they're allowing them.
Why do you say we cannot eliminate the lobbyists? Why?
Because that's part of the function. You have to be able to approach your representative and tell them what you want.
Isn't there laws that says that when there's conflict of interest, it should be? I mean, in private sector.
Conflict of interest is competition. Conflict of interest is good. If I'm coming from two separate let's take a simple illustration.
Let me repeat. In the private sector, the companies I worked for, okay, there are certain things that you cannot accept a gift.
Well, legislators aren't supposed to be able to accept a gift, right?
They accept gifts all the time.
Well,
And
that's against the law.
Right.
That's against the law.
Okay, well, they should be tried for this.
Agreed.
Yeah.
Agreed. You got to follow the rules. I'm not saying that there shouldn't be rules. I'm saying that you cannot limit access. Part of a democracy, part of a republic, is to be able to approach your elected representative and say, I want this. And that should be able to occur whether you're an individual,
Yeah.
whether you're an organization,
Okay.
whether you're a business,
Because
whether you're a political party,
the way
doesn't matter.
the way I think about lobbyists is always has to do with money.
Sure. Well, and that's the
Today.
unfortunate perception. But the definition of lobbying is educating your lawmaker. That's the definition of lobbying, and anybody can do it. And we, as individuals, should be doing more of it. Because again, let's go back to the whole idea of self-interest. If I'm a politician, and I don't have to listen to 80% of the people, man, that just saves me a whole bunch of headache right there, doesn't it? I don't have to worry about it. 80% of the sheeple are doing it because they don't care. They've given up their rights, they've given up their self-interest, it doesn't matter. Now all I have to worry about is the 20% of the people that are pulling on that canvas to try and make a game to play on, right?
Can I tell you what I think a lot of the 80% think?
What's that?
Really? And I'm amazed, because when I talk to some people, they say, the government knows better, and they have the right to make us do what they want. What?
Well,
Yeah, I've heard that.
and that's what I'm talking about is people that have given up, sheeple that have given up on their own
I'm serious. Some people
self-interest,
talk
their
about
own value, their own worth. And that's hopefully what we can help change.
That's what happened to the Germans. They were respectful people.
Right.
And they felt that their government so they
Everything that Hitler did was
that's
legal.
what happened to the Germans.
Right.
First thing he did was take over the automotive industry, the banking industry. So we're looking at the same exact.
It's going down the
I
path.
mean,
There's only two ways to stop it. One is through diligent guarding of your civil liberties and the Constitution, and trying to get people to wake up and to understand that their self-interest is the most important thing. Or there's other ways that, frankly, this group isn't going to be associated with, so we won't even discuss them. All right. The idea, though, is that if I'm a politician and I only have to listen to 20% of the people playing the game, now all I got to do is figure out which 10 or 11% is going to give me the best deal, right? Because I only need 11% to get reelected, is really what it comes down to. Everybody follow me on that? Because that's what's going on in our political system. So as a politician, I'm doing what I'm supposed to be doing. I'm enacting my self-interest. I'm listening to the only people that are bitching, and the only people that are playing the game, the only people that have got a dog in the fight, because everybody else has given it up. They've all given up on their self-interest in their own power. They've given their power to somebody else, because power doesn't reside by itself. Okay? If you give up your power and you don't enact your power, somebody else will gladly take it and use it for you on your behalf, in your name. And that's where we come to lots of examples over the last several years. But if I'm a special interest, if I'm a Monsanto, if I'm a big oil, if I'm a large conglomerate, if I'm a DuPont, does it behoove me to, or do I have an obligation to, or should I want to, care what the people think? Especially if 80% of them aren't saying anything and don't care and are just going to go with what the government does. I don't have to worry about even worrying about what the market repercussions are, because I can get the self-interested politicians, I can lobby them to do what I want them to do, right? And nobody's gonna say anything about it.
And that's already happened in the food. There's 7 corporations in the United States that actually control our food.
Well, that's why I keep saying Monsanto, because yeah, they're
Yeah, and
the
Monsanto's
GMOs.
a big one, but.
The GMOs.
Yeah.
But and you have another situation here. We see the two biggest interest groups in the country, which are, I've already mentioned them, right? The Republicans and the Democrats, right? They have decided that they're going to control. They're gonna collude to control. The way that they do that is they limit third-party access. The way that they do that is they have primary elections. The way that they do that is discourage anybody that has any alternative thought other than either the liberal agenda or the Republican agenda to not be involved. If you're not going to play with us, then you're not going to play, right? They do everything they can to push down other entries into the political system.
The Rossborough Towers.
Well,
They also have that write-in candidate screwy law too.
oh, well, that's a Florida thing as well. I mean, and there's all sorts of nuances. And once you get a political base and power, like for instance here in the state of Florida, our entire legislative community is basically one party. You know, it's 76% Republican. And the rest are Democrats. And the Democrats that are there, they act like the Republicans, right? And there's really no difference, as was mentioned before, between the two different parties. You really have no distinction. You can look at something like CISPA that happened yesterday, where you had, or not yesterday, but last week, we had the House of Representatives vote on internet surveillance. And you would think, well, civil liberties, right? Protection of liberties, protection of that sort of stuff. Well,
Fourth Amendment.
yeah, Fourth Amendment. The Democrats should be all over the Fourth Amendment, right?
Yeah.
50% of them voted for it. 50% of them voted for it. It passed with an overwhelming majority in the House, with bipartisan support. You know, but supposedly, you know, we have a difference between the two. What it comes down to is they have realized that they don't have to be afraid of our self-interest anymore. They understand that there are 80% of the sheeple out there that aren't going to play the game, that aren't going to be involved, that aren't going to hold them accountable. The only way that our entire system works is if the checks and balances work one against each other. If the states work against the federal, if the local works against the states, okay? The whole idea of the Constitution, the Republic, the Federalist system was to share power, share responsibilities, so that these checks and balances can come into play. And the largest check against all of it was ultimately the citizen vote. Okay, because that's the only check that can hit all 3 levels of government, right? That's the only check where, as a citizen, you can voice your dissent against what is going on in that particular office. Okay, now people will argue about the presidential level race, whether it's electoral college or popular vote, and we don't need to get into that, and that's semantics. But you can vote for U.S. senators, you can vote for U.S. congressmen, you can vote for your state level reps, you can vote for your county commissioners, and all the way down the line. And what's really, really disturbing is when you go from federal to local, you actually have an inverse curve. In other words, at the federal level, we have 20% of the people playing the game, where it's removed, and we really don't know what they're doing. And we're kind of not sure what's going on because it's at such a high level. When you get to the state level, that number drops to about 12-15%, where we should all be more in tune because these are the people that are making laws that affect our self-interest, that affect what's going on with our lives. And then the really disturbing stat is when you get to local level, county commissioner, mayoral, you're talking about 7 to 9% of people that are playing the game. How easy do you think it is to consolidate power when you only have to get a hold of 7 to 9% of the population?
This is not a new thing that started 10 years ago.
No, it's not a new
You can
thing.
look back to the 1880s, and then even the 17th Amendment where it said we're going to directly
Well,
elect
yeah,
our senators.
that was the biggest scam in history,
But
wasn't it?
Before that, they actually had a high number of turnover in the Senate because the legislatures would fire the senators if
For
they
not
weren't
representing the
voting
states.
Right.
And
then
that was a
they-
check that we
And
removed.
Nelson Aldrich and his buddy of tyrants got the 17th Amendment in with the 16th Amendment.
Right.
And our pockets are being picked.
You're absolutely
So
correct.
It goes back to like even my grandfather was asleep.
Well, really, what happened, when all this really began to occur in mass and in momentum was in the early 1900s, okay? And it started late 1800s with some state involvement, but when you get into basically from 1913 to 1937, you have a 25-year period of complete tyranny. Okay? And really, it's what it amounts to. And it's because the sheeple were asleep back in those generations and not realizing what they had, and they were sold, oh, you're going to have direct election to the Senate. You know, it's good to allow the people to elect the Senate. And everybody bought it, hook, line, and sinker. But what that removed was one of the checks from the very delicate structure of the checks and balances in the Constitution. All right? And that was very much an important, very important check that we lost. And you're right. But the only way we're going to reverse any of this, guys, is to educate people and enlighten people, awaken people, that their self-interest is not only the most important to them, but it's the most important to everybody. Jeremy Bentham was a classical liberalist out of the Renaissance that where a lot of our philosophy comes from. The idea that the founders were thinking of was, how do we produce the most amount of good for the most amount of people? Okay? And they argued back and forth, well, will it be a monarchy, or will it be a democracy? Will it be socialism? Will it be communism? What kind of liberalism will it be? And really, when you have a bunch of mercantile, self-individualists, rugged individualists, it really came down to two philosophies. And it was between Hobbes and Locke. Okay? And Hobbes was the Tory philosophy. Hobbes was the monarchy philosophy. Hobbes was the idea that the human nature was so ill-conceived that if there was a baby crying in the woods, in nature, the human would leave that baby to die and would walk away from it. Therefore, through Hobbes' argument for the monarchy, you must have somebody anointed by God that will watch over the flock, literally, the sheep, okay, and make sure that they do the right thing and live and socialize together. Locke had a different perspective. Locke said, no, human nature is good, and human nature would by default take that baby and care for it and nurture it. And that's why, you know, we have to champion the self-interest, the individual, the individual free will is the core of everything that the Constitution is based around. It is the final check on everything because, again, we can all have different ideas of what's important to us, and we should. The more diversity that we have, actually, the better government we are going to have. The more opposing ideas that we have, the more taut we can make that trampoline, and the more space we can have for more people to play. The less diverse, the less amount of people that are that are going after their own self-interest means that trampoline shrinks. And there's less surface for everybody to play, and in fact, we're down to a point where it doesn't even bounce anymore, because we're just doing the same thing over and over and over and over again. It is my hope that we make the priority of this group that we're trying to figure out how to build and organize to enlighten folks on taking their own self-interest and their own power back. Because once they do that, I don't care if they're a socialist. I know that goes over bad in this group. I don't care if they're a libertarian. I don't care if they're a Democrat. I don't care if they're a Republican. All I care about is them acting in their self-interest and following the rule book, which is the Constitution. Okay? Without that, we are lost. We have to build from there. Okay, so that's my particular point of view and philosophy on where we go, how we build, what is the foundation. What I'd like to see from this group in the future is to build on this kind of series. I'll be glad to do a talk at any meeting, every meeting, wherever, whenever, and we can build on how do we help people understand what their self-interest is, and how do they do that? How do they enact in their self-interest? I mean, we haven't taught civics in American educational system in, I don't know, 20 years at least.
Really?
We've taught a version of history and what people have done to enact in their civil rights and in their civil obligation, but we've never taught how to be active citizens. And I think that's what this group should really be focusing on, is getting people to register to vote, showing people where they can read and educate themselves about different things that are going on. Give them an idea of how our representatives, our different elected representatives from local, state, to federal, how do they measure up against the Constitution? What does their voting record say? Did they vote with the Constitution or against the Constitution? Secondarily, did they vote with what the people they represent want? Or did they vote with what some special interest want?